An ambulant bag was used to try to get the 6-month-old to breathe. Paramedics placed a tube in Alora's lungs, basically trying to breathe for her too. IVs were set up to replace the blood loss. They intensely listened for an encouraging sound, not knowing that the bullet had collapsed her left lung and pierced her heart, literally tearing up her insides. After handing the lifeless body of 5-year-old Laura over to the paramedics, Officer Mendoza walked out to the lawn and threw up. It was so sad, Bimankano, to see a mom and her 2 children just lying there side by side, her brains on the floor and her kids next to her. Firefighters and policemen, most of them with children of their own, were screaming, "We need this," or "We need that." The sights and smells and the sounds caused a complete sensory overload. Cops and firemen, breeds of humanity, whom many people mistakenly believe are callous, uncaring, and inured to this kind of experience, were emotionally drained as well. The fact, said Gano, that there were people out there who were actually capable of killing children. You wonder, these kids didn't do anything. I mean, the 6-month-old baby had a chance. The 5-year-old girl had a chance, and their chances were taken away from them. That's when all it started hitting me, especially having kids of my own. I just think, what if someone was to come into my home and kill me, kill my wife, and kill my kids? And the worst part is the fact that the few moments that that little girl was alive, you wonder if she knew what was going on. Did she know her mom was being killed? It's just a kid should never have to have those feelings or see it. And the next thing, she's shot. After transporting the 2 children to separate hospitals, neither made it alive. Gano and his partner returned to the scene and walked through it again for documentation purposes. Then they headed back to the station. Gano had to use a water hose to wash the blood, brain matter, and pieces of skull from his boots. Normally after a call, he and other crew would sit around and discuss it, critique what they'd done, and plan what their responses might be in the future. Often the adrenaline was still rushing and everyone was active and talkative. This time it was solemn. Barely a word was spoken between them. Each man dealt with what he'd seen in his own private way. Officer Nelson, on the job for 3 years and himself the son of a small town police chief, had started the night on the graveyard shift. He worked through the morning hours, went home, and then fell into an uneasy sleep. He woke up in time to catch the 6 o'clock television news. Sitting on the couch, he watched the story about the Grizzly Maxon murders and broke down in tears. What a heinous, senseless, cowardly act, he thought. Paramedic Gano, who became a police officer in El Monte a few years later, is convinced that he will never forget it. He explained, "Part of it will be with me forever. Things that are done just horribly to children. I think, in a way, it kills part of you, kills your personality or your insides, blackens you a little bit more, and it just really bothers you." It certainly bothered Joe Moreno, victim Dito's 42-year-old brother, who also lived in the area. That same April 22nd night as the murders, he showed up at the crime scene and reported to a police officer that he believed a man named Wedo Shai either was the killer or had recruited someone to do it. The next day he added the name Luis Pelon Maciel. That same day, 800 miles away, Boxer Enriquez, sitting in his cell at Pelican Bay State Prison, was watching television news when he first heard that La M executed a family, including a 6-month-old child and a 5-year-old girl. He looked over at his new cellmate and said, "That can't be right." Daryl Night Owl Baca, a convicted murderer and M member, shook his head in disbelief. Fuck, they're killing babies. In the days following the Maxim Road murders, there was massive news coverage of the killings, and the reports tied the massacre directly to the Mexican Mafia. Boxer was among those who didn't appreciate the growing negative publicity. We saw it on the world news. It was all over the news. We, La M, were all painted with the same brush. Baby killers, and it's never been us. We don't kill babies. A relative of Anthony Scar Torres, one of the driving forces behind the killings, was also especially unnerved by the murder of babies. So much so that the person confided in someone at her job that Scar and his friends were the Maxim Road murderers. El Monte detective Marty Penny, a gregarious gang cop who always had his ear to the ground, was sitting at his desk at the police community relations office when he got the call 3 days after the murders. The person on the other end of the line wanted to remain anonymous. They set up a meeting and cops ended up with a list of solid suspects. Then on May 15th, during a jailhouse interview with Penny and homicide detective John Laurie, suspect Scar Torres, off the record, identified Jimmy character Palma as the one who shot the kids. Scar had been arrested in an unrelated attempted murder case. Earlier the same day, character turned himself in to his parole officer to go into drug rehabilitation. He denied he was part of the Maxim Road murders. Near the end of July, another informant told investigators that he overheard Scar and character talking about a week after the murders. He said Scar asked character in an angry tone, "What's wrong with you?" And character shot back, "I don't give a shit. I'm crazy. I'll kill anyone." Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department homicide detectives had the killers' names and worked at a methodical pace to put the case together. Rene Enriquez said that the Mexican Mafia's hierarchy was completely appalled, and the Maxim Road massacre continued to be the talk of Pelican Bay State Prison. He remembered that even the hardest hardcore La M members were shaking their heads in disgust. In his own pod area, there was Topo Peters, Jaco Padilla, Little Mo Ruiz, Bruiser, Dolento, Grumpy Padilla, and Muskie Castaneda, all mafiosi. Boxer said everyone agreed they couldn't put up with hits like this. No self-respecting mobster had any outward compunction about killing, but this was different. On weekly visiting days, small groups of inmates are escorted together to the visiting area. The visiting room itself consists of two long, back-to-back rows of small, secure cells. On the back side of each prisoner's visiting cell is a perforated steel door. Inmates are able to communicate with each other by calling out to those situated adjacent to them or behind them. For the next few weekly visiting days, the Maxim Road murders became the primary topic of discussion. Cuate Grajeda reached out to Boxer. "This made the clica look bad. Whoever did this has to go." The talk about Maxim Road extended into the prison law library, where inmates were kept in separate booths, also equipped with perforated metal doors for individual study. A court decision had allowed for inmates in the library to speak to each other. Enriquez sat near David Spider Galvadon the next day after he heard the news. Spider said, "Whoever called this has to go, and it has to be your homeboy who called this shit." It had surfaced quickly that Wedo Shyrock was the one who ordered the hit. Shy too became a main topic of conversation. Boxer and his cellmate Night Owl, who was also from Artesia 13, kept hearing from other mafioso, "That's your homeboy." "You don't know for sure it was Shy," argued Boxer. There was some sentiment for executing Wedo Shy because he had ordered the killings. He'd also sponsored Pelon Messial for membership into the organization. Boxer knew that his enemies in the mob could also use that against him, being a close ally of Shy's. Meanwhile, Wedo Shy Shryak didn't waste any time before sending a letter to Enriquez asking him to tell the other carnales he had nothing to do with ordering up dead babies. Boxer remembered the letter saying, "I didn't ask him, Pelon Messiel, to kill the babies. I asked him to kill Dito and this other guy, 2 dropouts. Then they went and did this on their own. I swear to God, I didn't do this. I give you my word, brother. I didn't do this." Boxer Enriquez believed him and stood by Shy. So did others, and eventually Wedo Shy Shryak managed to get a pass. I knew he inadvertently did it. That's his nature. In his big booming voice, he probably said, "Kill them all, kill them all, kill all those motherfuckers." That's what he would say all the time. And I bet that's what he said to this guy Pelon. "Fuck them all, kill all them motherfuckers." And that's exactly what he did. Maciel did what he was told. On September 28, 1995, a murder indictment was unsealed naming Anthony Scar Torres, Jimmy Character Palma, Richard Primo Valdez, and Daniel Tricky Logan. All were in custody by then except Valdez, who had moved in with his mother in Salt Lake City, Utah, within a week of the murders. On December 6, 1995, a grand jury indicted Luis Pelon Maciel and Jose Pepe Ortiz. Ortiz was already in state prison on another charge. Maciel was arrested a week later, coming out of a motel with his girlfriend in a nearby city of Rosemead. His wife had kicked him out of the house 3 months earlier for having an affair. Mateo and Creeper, who were now in the backup car the night of the murders, were never charged. Neither was La M's Wedo Shy Shryak. Federal prosecutors had other trial plans for him. They let the state prosecute all the Maxim Road defendants, and the feds would go after Shy during a massive Mexican Mafia racketeering trial down the road. In June 1997, gunmen Jimmy Character Palma and Richard Primo Valdez, convicted of all 5 murders the previous December, were sentenced to death by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison. They were 23 and 24 years old at the time. Palma sat there silently as the sentences were read. Valdez screamed an obscenity at the judge. During the trial, Valdez, at one time a promising Little League baseball player, threw a Kleenex box at a sleeping juror and hit him in the head about 25 feet away. Anthony Scar Torres, 31 years old, was sentenced the same week to life in prison without the possibility of parole for his role in the murders. 22-year-old Daniel Tricky Logan, the driver of the getaway car, received a prison term of 129 years to life. A 31-year-old Jose Pepe Ortiz, a passenger in the backup car who helped give directions to the Moreno home, was also sentenced to 129 years to life behind bars. Jimmy Palma hadn't even been at San Quentin for 3 weeks when it happened on October 13, 1997. The first 2 weeks were spent in processing, and now he was allowed out on one of the small death row exercise yards. There were about a dozen other inmates out there with him, all of them associated with La M or the Aryan Brotherhood. It was only his second time out on the yard. He just finished a sweaty game of basketball and was arguably a little worn out. Character was standing in an area frequented by Mexican Mafia members and associates when the knife plunged into his flesh. It was over quickly. The baby killer was dead. 4 stab wounds in his chest, a fatal one in the heart. No inmates came to his aid. The assailant was never charged with the murder. In fact, he was never officially identified. There's a raw sense of justice in that, reflected boxer Enriquez. He had it coming. There was no remorse for doing this guy. He killed babies and he had to go. There is justice and there is the death penalty in California. Sometimes it just happens that the Mexican Mafia carries it out. 2.5 months later, the normally jocular LA Superior Court Judge Charles Horan didn't think it was funny at all when he sentenced Pelon to die by lethal injection. During his first week on San Quentin's death row, Pelon Maciel decided the main exercise yard wasn't the best place for him to spend his time. He now goes to a special yard for inmates with safety concerns. Maciel only comes out of his cell accompanied by 1 or 2 convicts who have no gang affiliations as he waits for his official date in the state's execution chamber. That is, unless La M can come up with a plan to make it happen sooner. Deputy District Attorney Anthony Mancella, a tenacious prosecutor who put Maciel away, said most people were already aware of the presence of the Mexican Mafia in the prison system, but few people realize the influence the Mexican Mafia has on the streets and the community. This case shows just what influence they have. Mancella grew up in New Jersey and still speaks with a slight Jersey accent developed years ago in a neighborhood that is captured on video in the opening credits of the television show The Sopranos. His father, a first-generation Italian-American, was a lawyer who refused to represent mob guys because they didn't meet his standards of right and wrong. His bright son went to the U.S. Air Force Academy and then on to law school at prestigious Georgetown University. Anthony Mancella considers himself a streetwise attorney who grew up in a place where Italian wise guys wielded power, more than they deserve. He doesn't hesitate to make a comparison. The Mexican Mafia is right now where La Cosa Nostra was 50 years ago. We've got a shot from keeping it from growing into what LCM became. Boxer had a last word. The Maxim murders tarnished the Mexican Mafia's image, but really showed it for what it is, a malignancy. In truth, they had more than a little something to do with the killings.